Bring in for more analysis Elizabeth Dickinson, who is a senior analyst at the International Crisis Group, specialist on the situation in Colombia. Elizabeth, thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate your time. This 13-point plan that the protesters have apparently presented to the president, how do you feel about that? Do you think this has a chance of getting through, a chance of calming the situation?
Well, one of the challenges of these protests for the government is that it's an amalgam of groups and concerns that are being raised all at the same time. In many ways, what we're seeing on the streets now has sort of been bottled up for many years, and it's now coming to the surface. We see a lot of urban grievances, whether about sort of general quality of life, inequality, the cost of living, pensions, healthcare. All of these things sort of coming to the surface. But at the same time, you have a lot of other issues that are less related to sort of day-to-day life, but more related to the future of the country. For example, the implementation of the peace accord, which is something that's very important, of course, to people in the cities, but even more so to the people who live in farther flung areas of the country where security remains a particular challenge.
So you mentioned the FARC Accord already, for which, of course, the previous president got the Nobel Peace Prize. The US has weighed in to say it supports Duque, will remain steadfastly alongside him. Is that likely to help or hinder, do you think?
I'm not sure it will have an impact either way. I think that one of the challenges at the moment is the raising of expectations from the peace accord. In 2016, when the agreement was signed, there was a lot of hope and expectation that reforms, for example, to land ownership, reforms in the rural areas would come to fruition very quickly. In fact, it's taken quite a bit more time and proven quite a bit more politically challenging. A lot of the reforms from the peace accord have been held up in Congress or other parts of the government, for example. And in many ways, what we're seeing is sort of a frustration with that slowness and that apparent lack of implementation to the accord itself.
Elizabeth, do you think that the President Duque can survive what is happening right now in Colombia?
What we're seeing right now is something of a disconnect, I think, between where the government is and where the street is. And it's almost as if they're speaking different languages to one another and they're sort of talking past each other. I think that's very evident in both the list of demands that were presented and also in the government response. The list of demands, for example, are things that this government has actually actively campaigned against. So things like countering privatization, a lot of reforms that are sort of very different from the kind of government that was elected. Meanwhile, the government response has been a little bit tone deaf, let's say, in terms of understanding what are the protesters' concerns and really hearing them and articulating a coherent response to the real and very reasonable grievances that are on the street. So I think until they start sort of speaking to each other rather than speaking past each other, it's very hard to see a way forward.
There are excuse me, Elizabeth, there are, or there seems to be, looking at this from the outside, a certain pattern across Latin America with conflict and strife in many countries right now. I'm thinking Chile, I'm thinking Venezuela, now Colombia. Clearly, there's been stuff in Central America too. What are the issues that are driving people to be angry in Colombia? What are the specific things you think that are making people come onto the street and complain and campaign and get very angry?
I certainly think that there is a level of inspiration from what's happened elsewhere in Latin America, thinking particularly of Chile, where a lot of the issues are very similar between Colombia and Chile. We're talking about, again, quality of life, sort of basic inequality in the society. Parts of Colombia really feel that they haven't experienced the benefits of growth that other parts of Colombia have, that the pension system is fundamentally unequal, that the education system is fundamentally skewed against those who don't have resources. These are the sort of grievances that have brought people to the street in various parts of Latin America. And I think the more that people here see mobilization elsewhere in the region, the more they take inspiration from that. And it does feed into a bit of a cycle.
Is there a sense, Elizabeth, that people in Colombia feel that they are without power? The sense that they can't really change things no matter what they do. If they work, if they don't work, they're kind of trapped.
Well, I think you've exactly said it, and this is one of the frustrations I think of protesters on the street is that one of the things that has tended to happen in Colombian politics is that the elite of Colombian politics tend to reproduce themselves. So whether the government is on the left or the right or the center, what you get is sort of a reproduction of the same characters, the same ideas, the same sort of systematic responses to the problems that never seem to really get solved. So I think in many ways, again, as you said, this is really an explosion of feeling that, we are powerless, and this is really the only way that the government will hear our message. And we can say in that regard that the protest has had an impact, because for the first time, the government is having to respond to some of these very concrete issues that are being brought to the forefront.
We will watch for all developments. And thank you so much for your analysis, Elizabeth Dickinson, for giving us a real context and some depth into what is happening with these ongoing protests in Colombia, which looks set very much to continue. Elizabeth Dickinson from the International Crisis Group, senior analyst and specialist, as we heard that on the situation in Colombia. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on France 24.